All right, open up to the book of These Are the Words. Open up to the book of the second law. These are all different titles for Deuteronomy. So in the Hebrew title of Deuteronomy is These Are the Words. Why would they give this book a title such as These Are the Words? Asheron. Well, yes, that would be a good explanation also for the second title. Maggie?
Because it's the first words of the...
Because the very first line, very good, is These Are the Words. Okay, and that was how you would name ancient documents, right? That's a long-standing custom. So in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy is given the title Deuteronomy, which means the second law. All right, so the second law of Moses, this is the second proclamation of the Mosaic Law. And this proclamation of this law, why is he proclaiming it again? Because they're right on the border of the Promised Land. They're at the end of the 40 years wandering, which means this is a new generation of Israelites. The old generation has died, and so this new generation of responsible adults is receiving this. It's one big long sermon from Moses. All right, this entire book is one sermon, and it's being given to the generation, to the children of the generation that came out of Egypt. Yes, Catherine.
Are we going to go over the 3 questions we're supposed to answer in each book?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the intended audience, it's the Israelites. It's that second generation. They're the intended audience that's come out of Egypt. That's why things are getting repeated. The author is Moses, and the message is, the purpose of this is to catechize those who did not live to see, who were not alive during the plagues, those who are not alive during the waters of Meribah and Massah, so on and so forth. Okay, and this is the last book in the Pentateuch, and all the Pentateuch has the same. Just for your reference, it has the same author, intended audience. Except maybe the distinction is that this one is specifically being addressed to the descendants. And its purpose is catechesis, passing on the faith. All right, so at the top of Deuteronomy, you should note this is one long sermon from Moses. It's directed to the descendants of the generation that came out of Egypt, and that there's a lot of catechetical content in this. So because it's a reproclamation of the law, there's going to be repetitions of what you've already seen in Numbers, in Exodus, in Leviticus, being like reworked into one sermon. So Moses is speaking this to the people, and he's like going off the top of his head. Yes, Julia. It's the second generation. So those who left Egypt are all dead. It's now their children who are the nation of Israel. This is at the end of the 40 years wandering in the wilderness. All right, without further ado, chapter 1, verse 1. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah, over against Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazarah, and Dizab. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. All right, so where they finally end up at the conclusion of their 40 years was really just an 11-day walk. Okay, so you just get the reminder that they've been doing this roundabout wandering in the wilderness as God's punishment. Let's jump ahead to chapter 21. Sorry, not chapter 21. That would be great. No, I love Deuteronomy. Just kidding. All right, so verse 21, chapter 1, verse 21. Behold, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up, take possession as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Then all of you came near me and said, let us send men before us that they may explore the land for us and bring us word again of the way which we must go up and the cities into which we shall come. So Moses, he's rehashing the history of what's happening, right? And so this is, you can make a reference to Numbers 13. In Numbers 13 is when they send spies out into the promised land. And here in Deuteronomy, we find that it was at the request of the Israelites to send the spies in. All right, and then if you go back to Numbers 13, you'll read that, God tells Moses, yes, go send these spies in. But this helps give some context that even from the beginning, the request to hey, can we go scope out this land, shows what Israel was struggling with throughout that whole process in the wilderness, which was a lack of faith, a lack of trust. Jump ahead to verse 34. And Moses, he's still rehashing the history of what happened in Numbers. And he says, and the Lord heard your words and was angered, and he swore, referring to the words of the Israelites, saying, we don't want to go in. We'd rather die in the wilderness. Verse 35, not one of these men of this evil generation shall see the good land which I swore to give to your fathers, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him and to his children I will give the land upon which he has trodden, because he has wholly followed the Lord. One line I want you to underline here is verse 35. Not one of these men of this underlined evil generation. And the reason why I want you to underline that is because Jesus, when he is preaching to the Israelites, to the Jews in his day, he refers to them also as a wicked or an evil generation. And when Jesus is doing it, he's comparing them to the Israelites in the wilderness, right? And their stubbornness, and their lack of willingness to follow God, which is exactly what Christ encounters during his ministry. Yes?
What did you say he's comparing to?
When Jesus in the Gospels is referring to the Jews as a wicked or evil generation, he's making a comparison to the Israelites who left Egypt, who God gave everything to, and they would not obey, they would not follow, and they would not listen. And so there's a parallel between Jesus and Moses. Jesus is the new Moses, and he has a lot of the same problems with the Israelites, with the Jews, that Jesus has a lot of the same problems with the Jews that Moses had with the Israelites in the wilderness. All right, so history lessons continue, and let's jump ahead to chapter 4. In chapter 4, Moses is exhorting the people to follow the commandments and to obey God this time. Let's go to chapter 4, verse 15. Chapter 4, verse 15. Therefore, take good heed to yourselves. Moses is explaining one of the commands to the Israelites. Since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb, out of the midst of the fire, beware lest you act corruptly by making a graven image for yourself in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. Now, this passage from Deuteronomy is where you get the explicit prohibition of making an image of Yahweh. All right, so the first commandment is a condemnation of idols. Here in Deuteronomy, it says, because God didn't show you his form, don't try to depict God in any form. The tabernacle still has religious imagery of seraphim, pomegranates, right? There is artwork in the tabernacle. So it's not a ban on religious artwork, but there's a strict prohibition right now on trying to depict God in art. Why is that? It's because this is to avoid the Israelites being led into error. God has not yet fully revealed himself. Now, if there's a strict prohibition on making an image of Yahweh, of God, we have images of God the Father like all over the place in churches, right? So should we go full-blown iconoclast and just destroy the images of God? Or has something changed from this scenario that makes it okay? Caleb.
Well, he's not saying that the depiction. He's saying that if we create something to say this is what God looks like, then yeah, no, that's not right.
Mhm.
Saying this is what God is. It's also not right. But the church, even our church does it. We have stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're just making a statue of what could be, could represent God, but you're not saying that's what he looks like. We got it. He's just saying because we need something that we can't comprehend the form. We haven't seen it, so we're just putting something that looks something like him. We're not going to say that is what he is.
Something as an assistance, a reminder, something of an assistance to for like be a focal point. Yeah. Why wouldn't God let the Israelites do that? So going back to the beginning of verse 15, think about God's rationale. What's his reasoning?
He doesn't.
I'm gonna hop over to Ashron and give him a chance. Yeah.
So, because the last time the Israelites came from the pagan society, where if you were to mimic God, they could fall into polytheism.
Yeah.
Which is what happened with old cat. So he's trying to avoid that happening again.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And why we're allowed to do it now is because we. Same thing with what Caleb said, but we've also seen what God would look like.
So we're past the point of being culturally polytheistic, so it's not really a temptation for us the same way it may have been for the Israelites. Okay.
And also, God did come down in human form.
Bingo.
He came down
Okay.
in Jesus
Yeah.
and revealed himself in a physical manifestation.
Yes. Thank you. Verse 15, the second sentence. Since you saw no form on that day when God spoke to you, don't make an image. Have we seen the form of God now? Yeah. So when God becomes man, the incarnation changes this, all right? We now have an image of the Father because Jesus told us, whoever sees me sees the Father. If you know me, you know the Father. I and the Father are one. All right, so God has been fully revealed, and the incarnation happened, so God has become man. So it is appropriate to depict God now, in this human figure. Like Michelangelo's depiction of God in the Sistine Chapel is appropriate because we have the form of God has been revealed to us. All right. Let's continue to jump ahead to chapter 5, verse 21. So chapter 5 is a reproclamation of the Ten Commandments. And in verse 21, I just want to point out to you, it goes, neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his donkey, and anything that is your neighbor's. So when we memorize the Ten Commandments, we memorize that the 9th commandment is thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and the 10th commandment is thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. In Exodus, those are flipped. Don't covet your neighbor's property comes first, and then don't covet your neighbor's wife is what comes at number 10. And when you get to Deuteronomy, the order's switched. So what does that mean? It means the order is actually not that important. But just for historical purposes, what you understand is when we do the categorization, we're following the Deuteronomy categorization, right? Or the Deuteronomy order of those things that place the 9th and 10th commandment. Jump ahead to chapter 6, verse 1. Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the ordinances which the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. All right, so verse 4 is the great Shema prayer, S-H-M-A. The great Shema. This is one of the most important summaries of the Israelites' obligations, of Jews' obligations, is to pray this prayer and to repeat this prayer to their children constantly. All right, so that's a catechetical purpose. Is how you're going to hand on the faith onto your kids. You are going to memorize this prayer and teach this prayer to them.
That's verse number 4.
Yeah, verse number 4 in following. Verse number 4 and 5. The main message, the heart of this is don't be polytheistic. Okay, again, the gravest offense in the Old Testament, the worst violation of the law of Moses is to be polytheist. It's not anti-Trinitarian. When you get into debates with Jews, so they will definitely bring this up, and it's something you'd have to be prepared for if you ever plan on doing evangelization or apologetics with them. It's called the Shema prayer because Shema means listen. And that's how the prayer begins. Listen, O Israel. Hear, O Israel. Shema means listen. Now, another thing I want to draw your attention to is in verse 3, there's this command. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, do these commands, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you. So in Deuteronomy, there's a lot of promises of rewards for following the law and curses for disobeying the law. And what this can lead some people to is falling into the error of what's called Deuteronomistic theology. All right, this is an error that some Christians have unfortunately fallen into, and as we're going through Deuteronomy, I'm going to show you guys how Deuteronomy itself undermines this whole idea. But if you may have heard of things like the wealth and health gospel, Joel Osteen, that rat bag. So basically, it's the idea that if I follow God's commands perfectly, I'm going to prosper and be super wealthy. And my wealth is actually a sign of my fidelity to God. So you poor losers got to figure something else out. Okay.
Doesn't Job, the book of Job, basically disinherit that kind of statement?
Yeah, and so does Christ's preaching and the gospel. But
The young man with the possessions.
I guess if you're illiterate, then and you want to make a lot of money off of your megachurch, you'll promote it.
You fall into more money and more value than God anyway.
What's that?
You can fall into things because I have more money, I have more value than everybody else who has less money than I have.
Yeah.
Still being
Yeah.
still being there.
Now, don't get it wrong. God is definitely promising this. It's as long as you don't screw up, I'm giving you this promised land. There's going to be all these great benefits. And if you do screw up, I'm kicking you out of this land. Okay. The other is to then extrapolate, that, and then try to apply it to your own life, and count your blessings by just your material account. Okay, so jump ahead to 6:10. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you, with great and excellent cities which you did not build, and houses full of all good things, which you did not fill, and cisterns hewn out, which you did not hew, and vineyards and olive trees, which you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take heed lest you forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You can make a note here to Amos chapter 5, verse 11. Amos is one of the prophets, and the prophets are constantly calling back to Deuteronomy. Hello? Oh, okay, that thingamajig. Okay, yeah, all right. All right, yeah, they're in here. Okay. No, not here. All right. Jared Box people, you guys are going to deliver toys to children.
How you spell Amos?
Amos,
Yeah.
A-M-O-S,
Okay.
And it was 5:11.
511. So what's going to happen is Israel's going to come into the promised land, and they're going to take over all this wealth, these vineyards, these fields, ready to go, and they'd even work to build them, okay? Because God's blessing them so abundantly with this. And in the book of Amos, there's a recollection to it. When we get to the book of Amos, I'll remind you guys again of this passage in Deuteronomy. Jump ahead to chapter 7. When the Lord your God, chapter 7, verse 1, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations. All right, so underline, emphasize, there are 7 nations. What?
It wasn't that nation flipped the sign.
Oh, okay. 7 nations, all right? Why are there 7 nations being focal on the focus point here?
Because the number 7 is covenant number.
Yes, because it's the covenant number, right? Israel's going to possess this land because of the covenant. If Israel falls out of the covenant, they're not going to get this land, all right? Or they'll be kicked out of the land. So 7 nations, greater and mightier than yourselves, verse 2. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you, and you defeat them, then you must utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. Why can they not make a covenant with the nations? Caleb.
Because there'll be a snare and a thorn in their side, and will constantly be a temptation for polytheism and other pagan practices.
Yep, that's part number 1. Luan, do you have anything else to add to that?
I was going to say what you said.
Okay. When you make a covenant, you're also swearing by someone else's God. So you're entering into a religious ceremony acknowledging their gods as well. So you can't make a covenant with them because to do that would be to enter into a relationship with their gods, which you're not permitted to do. And then also they're going to be a snare for you if you keep them around. Verse 3, you shall not make marriages with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Remember in Genesis, there was that theme of listening to the woman and then not following God's commands because you were listening to the wife, all right? That has to do with this whole struggle of entering into the promised land. Do not take these Canaanite women to be your wives because they're just going to take you over their in-laws and then they're going to be dragging you into all these polytheistic weird cults and it's going to be a snare for you. Jump ahead to chapter 8. Chapter 8, verse 1. All the commandment which I command you this day, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give your fathers. And you shall remember, all right, underline remember, that's covenantal language. God remembered Noah. You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but that man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Make a note at the end of verse 3 to John chapter 6. All right, Jesus quotes this from the law. Man does not live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. What proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord? His word. Okay, and what is his word? His word is the second person of the Trinity, his son, Jesus. All right, also the manna comparison. You're leading into this imagery of the Eucharist. All right, you're not just living on the bread, but you're living on the word of God, and that's what's sustaining you. Verse 4, your clothing did not wear out upon you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. All right, so as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. That explains all the punishments, all right? What is God doing? He's disciplining his children. If you love your children, you are going to discipline them. If you don't love your children, you're going to let them run wild and do whatever they want. And then they grow up to become horrible people and terrible urchins, okay? So good parenting, you discipline your kid, and that's what God's been doing for the Israelites. Let's jump ahead to verse 11. Take heed lest you forget. Highlight forget. Remembrance, forgetfulness, knowing this is all covenantal language. So take heed lest you fall out of the covenant. Another way to read this. Take heed lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I command you this day. Lest when you have eaten and are full and have built excellent houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you to do you good in the end. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and my might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember, highlight remember, the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as at this day. In verse 19 and following, underline it all. And if you forget the Lord your God and go murder someone, no. And if you forget the Lord your God and go steal $1 million, no. If you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you this day that you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Chapter 9. Hear, O Israel, you are to pass over the Jordan this day, to go in to dispossess nations greater and mightier than yourselves, cities great and fortified up to heaven, a people great and tall, the sons of the Anakim, whom you know and of whom you have heard it said, who can stand before the son of Anak? Know therefore this day that he who goes over before you as a devouring fire is the Lord your God. He will destroy them and subdue them before you. So you shall drive them out and make them perish quickly, as the Lord has promised you. Verse 4 and following, make a note here. This is contrary to Deuteronomistic theology. So I said we were going to point out some places in Deuteronomy where it undermines that whole wealth and health gospel, the wealth and health of Deuteronomy. Do not say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. Whereas it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out from before you, and that he may confirm the word which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So there's two reasons why God's giving the Israelites this land. The promise to Abraham, and because the inhabitants are really, really bad. Like child sacrifice, bad. And you remember what the definition of a sacrifice is and how you participate in that sacrifice. And he made a promise to Abraham. It has nothing to do with the righteousness of these people. And if Numbers, Exodus, reading through that, I think we get a pretty clear image that, yeah, they're not exactly game time worthy for anything. Yes, Caleb. Yeah. Know therefore that the Lord your verse 6. Know therefore that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness. It's not Deuteronomistic theology. For you are a stubborn people. Remember, and do not forget that covenantal language. Remember, don't forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness from the day you came out of the land of Egypt until you came to this place. You have been rebellious against the Lord. Joe Olstein. All right. There is like evidence in Deuteronomy that the way that the text flows, that this is one long sermon, and we're not going to get into that because it's not that important for high school level course. All right. So let's just jump ahead to verse 12, chapter 10, verse 12. Chapter 10, verse 12. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I command you this day for your good. Behold, the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart in love upon your fathers, and chose their descendants after them, you above all peoples, as at this day. All right, so verse 12 and 13. To summarize it, God is not asking a lot out of you guys. Okay? All I'm asking you is follow the commandments. And by the way, following the commandments is also what's going to be to your benefit anywho. God's not asking a lot in this law. Just follow the directions. Verse 16. Circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart and be no longer stubborn. So while you join the nation of Israel in the Abraham covenant by being circumcised, that's not enough for God, right? That's just an outward sign. Circumcise the foreskin of your heart. What does that mean? Internalize the law. Don't just, get your mark to be part of the clan, but really live this out in your heart. This is the same thing that Jesus is telling the Pharisees during his ministry. Okay? And the scribes. They study the law. They tithe on all their mints and every shrub that comes out of their garden, but they're not internalizing the law. And they're failing in that regard. And Moses has the same message for the Israelites. There's not a drastic difference between the Old Testament and New Testament. Verse 17, for the Lord your God is God of gods and the Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the terrible God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the sojourner, giving them food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you are sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and cling to him. And by his name you shall swear. He is your praise. He is your God, who has done for you these great and terrible things with which your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as the stars of heaven for multitude. Why reference the stars of heaven for multitude? That's a reference back to Abraham, all right? God has fulfilled his promise to you. You're on the cusp of going in to take this promised land. And look, He's already fulfilled one of the promises to Abraham. Look at how the descendants have multiplied. Chapter 11 continues with rewards for obedience. We're not going to read through them, but you can just make a note like this is where people might get the Deuteronomistic theology ideas, okay? Because there's these promises for all these rewards for obeying God's law. But you now know that you also got chapter 9 in your back pocket, which God explicitly tells them. It actually has nothing to do with your righteousness, because you guys all kind of aren't that great. Chapter 13 is an important chapter. It has to do with prophets. So there's 3 ways that prophets can make a name for themselves. By being lucky. All right, you could predict the results of the presidential election, and it could be just based off of luck. And you actually have no expertise in analyzing polls. It could be through demonic forces that prophets, either exercise some like magic, what have you, or they are able to predict the future and something does come to pass, or God. Those are all the sources of the science of a prophet. So if a prophet is showing up and he starts preaching, how do you know this prophet is legit? How do you know he's not just some guy who's lucky? How do you know if he's not actually being influenced by a demon? How do you know if he's actually coming from Yahweh? So chapter 13 is the manual, the playbook for how Israel can discern this. And you can make a cross-reference to chapter 18, verse 20. We'll probably get there, have to get there tomorrow. Chapter 13. If a prophet arises among you, or a dreamer of dreams, and gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign or wonder which he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of the prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So what do you have to do when a prophet shows up? You have to test his doctrine. The prophet's job, right? The prophet is the mouthpiece of God. And as the mouthpiece of God, he's always going to be calling people to proper and true worship of Yahweh. So if the prophet shows up and he starts doing things, how do you know if he's legit? If he tells you, let's go to Jerusalem and offer proper sacrifices in the temple, he's a legit prophet. If he says, let me introduce you to my friend Baal, he likes to be worshipped on the top of this hill, yeah, it's time to kill that guy, okay? He's like under the influence of some demon, or he's just out of his league and made a lucky prediction. Verse 4, you shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and cling to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of bondage, to make you leave the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall purge the evil from the midst of you. If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, psst, let's go serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods of the people that are round about you, whether near you or far off from you, from the one end of the earth to the other, you shall not yield to him or listen to him, nor shall I pity him, nor shall you spare him, nor shall you conceal him, but you shall kill him. Your hand shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones, because he sought to draw you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and never again do any such wickedness that is among you. So trying to lead people into polytheism gets to you the capital of punishment in Israel.
What if there is someone who's just lacking and like keeps saying things that are correct, but like tries to lead the people to God? Because like, how will that work?
If someone is prophesying and he's leading the people to God,
Paisa criticizing just like God is telling to like just to say for like out of 1,000 people there's like one person who's lucky enough.
So someone's just consistently lucky and he's leading people to God. I think given Deuteronomy, that's how you can actually determine that guy is worth listening to.
What does Deuteronomy mean when it says that you have